Let's begin. I have the pleasure of welcoming Kenneth J. to give us a wonderful lecture on Dungan Ethnographer Ali Dzhon. Professor teaches modern languages, literatures, and linguistics at the City University of New York. His scholarly work focuses on Dungan literature and culture of Central Asia. This, of course, is related to the Hui culture in Northwest China and other parts of China as well. His other areas of interest include Siberian Tungus literatures and cultures, as well as Far Eastern Russian Empire emigre literature. He has a significant number of publications and grants. Some of his recent works have been Dungan Folk Tales and Legends, published by Peter Long in 2021. And he's going to be talking about his book today, Mystical Forest, collected poems and short stories of Dungan ethnographer Ali Dzhon. And he also, I think, is going to offer us some sort of a discount coupon on that, which he maybe can tell us a little bit about. So let's give a big welcome to Professor Kenneth J. And I should say that this is here at Ohio State University. I'm Mark Bender, and this is the class Chinese 7470, Chinese Ethnic Minority Literature. So take it away, Professor Kenneth E.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Bender, for setting up the talk, working with the logistical aspects and the audio today. I hope you can all see my shared screen at this point. Now you can see it, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So I'm trying to actually make it just the half screen so I can admit people as they come in. Can you still see the share screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Okay. So I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Department of East Asian Language and Literatures at Ohio State for hosting today's event. And a very warm welcome to all the students in Professor Bender's Ethnic Literature in China course, other attendees from OSU and beyond, right? And as Professor Bender mentioned, there is a discount flyer with a code that you can access on the events page of my website, which I'll mention at the end of the presentation, if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book, Mystical Forest. Yeah. So I'll be speaking for about 40 minutes, more or less, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So here, I'm going to start the slide show here. Okay. So Mystical Forest is a collection of poems and short stories of the leading Dungan ethnographer Ali Dzhon that I edited and translated, and this was published by Peter Lang in 2023. So his writings, you will see, shed light on a unique life experience. At the same time, in terms of his professional work, Dzhon stands out as a native ethnographer, that is, an ethnic Dungan studying his own people, when the classic ethnographic paradigm has been that of the non-native ethnographer or someone on the outside looking in. Okay. So, all right. So I would like to start with a brief introduction to the Dungan people. So the Hui people, who are called Huizu in standard or Beijing Mandarin Chinese, are an ethno-religious group predominantly composed of Chinese-speaking or Sinophone Muslims. And they number over 11 million, according to the 2020 Chinese National Census. And these are the forefathers, if you will, of the Dungans in Central Asia, who I will be addressing. And the Hui are distributed throughout China, mainly in the northwestern provinces and the central plain. In Mandarin Chinese, Zhongyuan. The Hui are one of 56 ethnic groups officially recognized by the People's Republic of China, which defines the Hui to include all historically Muslim communities not included in China's other ethnic groups. Okay. So now I'd like to speak briefly about the Dungan or Hui migrations from Northwest China to Central Asia. So these occurred in 3 major waves. The first took place in the winter of 1877 to 1878 in the immediate aftermath of the failed Dungan Revolt, which lasted from 1862 to approximately 1877 under the Manchu-led Qing dynasty. This revolt is also known as the Tongzhi Hui Luan, or Tongzhi Hui Revolt, or Hui Minorities War, which was fought mostly during the reign of the Tongzhi Emperor, who ruled from 1861 to 1875 during the Qing dynasty. The second major wave of Dungan migration occurred from 1881 to 1884. This was following the signing of the Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1881, which restored to China the Upper Ili Basin, which had been occupied by Russian troops since 1871 during the Dungan Revolt. In accordance with the terms of the treaty, which required the withdrawal of the Russian troops from the Upper Ili Basin, also known as the Kuljia area, the Dungans or Hui and Taranchi or Uyghur people, as they're known today, of the region were allowed the option to move to the Russian side of the border, and many chose to do so rather than remain under the oppressive Chinese rule. And then the third major wave of Dungan migration occurred in the first part of the 20th century, until the border was closed in the early 1960s. This was around the time of the Sino-Soviet split, which began in 1961, and it was immediately following the Great Chinese Famine, which lasted from 1959 to 1961. So most of the original Dungan settlers were poor, illiterate peasants or small urban craftsmen who came from Gansu province, Shanxi province, and Xinjiang in China. In terms of the current numbers, according to the latest census data available as of 2020, there are an estimated 150,000 Dungans in Central Asia. So the Dungans live primarily in the following regions, as you can see on the map. So first, Kyrgyzstan, and the population of Dungans is 73,977, according to the 2020 Kyrgyz census. The second region that they occupy is, they inhabit is Kazakhstan. The number is 72,361, according to the 2019 Kazakh census. And they also inhabit Uzbekistan, but in lesser numbers. So approximately 3,000, according to 2009 estimates of the Dungan Cultural Center of Uzbekistan. More recently, there has been a migration of Dungans from Central Asia to Saratov Oblast, which is located in the southeast of European Russia. And this migration began only in 2000, with 1,651 Dungans counted in the 2010 Russian census. By tradition, the Dungans are Sunni Muslims of the Hanafi school, like most of their Central Asian neighbors. The Dungans have traditionally had and continue for the most part to have large families, often with between 6 and 8 children, and they enjoy a reputation as a hardworking and prosperous people. Okay, now I'd like to make just a few brief comments about the Dungan language, which is very unique in several respects. So when the first Dungan migrants arrived in Central Asia, the only written language form that they had, it was Shell Arjing, which is a Perso-Arabic script that was originally used by the Dungans and continues to be used by the Hui Zu or Hui people in China. The use, however, was somewhat restricted. It was really only used for annotating religious texts prior to the Soviet period. And for those of you who know Chinese, you know that Xiao Arjing actually means children's script or minor script. And on this slide, you can see an excerpt from a Chinese Arabic Xiao Arjing trilingual dictionary published in 1955 in Shanghai. So you can get an idea of how the script actually looks. Next, there was some experimentation with Latin alphabets for the Dungan language between 1928 and 1953. So during the years 1928 to 1929, as the Kyrgyzs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic-speaking peoples of the Soviet Union were adopting the Latinized alphabet known as the New Turkic alphabet or New Alphabet, the Dungans adopted a Latinized alphabet based on the New Turkic alphabet, but adapted for languages of peoples of non-Turkic origin. For example, the Dungans, whose language is Sinitic. By 1932, the new Latinhua began to replace this first Latin alphabet. The Latinhua movement was spurred on by the fact that Muscovite political workers at the Scientific Research Institute on China, a unit of the Communist Academy, were joined by highly qualified linguists and sinologists from the Academy of Sciences in Leningrad. And then finally, from 1939 on, the Cyrillic alphabet gradually replaced the various Latin alphabets for all the national minority languages in the Soviet republics of Central Asia. The most important motivation for the switch was the desire of the Soviet government to facilitate making Russian a unified language of the USSR by having a single alphabet taught in elementary schools for Russian and the minority languages. With this change in alphabet delayed in some areas by the war and its aftermath, the implementation of a new Dungan alphabet based on the Russian script with 5 additional letters did not occur until 1953. So Dungan is unique and notable in that it is the only Sinitic language that is officially written using an alphabet or a morphophonemic system, linguistically speaking, instead of Chinese characters or sinographs, which constitute a morphosyllabic system. It's also interesting to note that an internal diglossic situation stems from the fact that Dungans are divided between the Gansu dialect, spoken mainly in Kyrgyzstan, and the Shanxi dialect, predominantly spoken in Kazakhstan. While nearly half of the young generation of Dungans today has no mastery of Dungan and can only speak Russian and sometimes also Kyrgyz or Kazakh, the regional languages. Okay. Okay, so now I would like to begin to talk about Ali Dzhon and the book. So Dzhon holds the rank of senior researcher in the Dungan and Chinese Studies Center of the National Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. He holds an honorary title as Honored Worker of Science of the National Academy of Sciences of the Kyrgyz Republic as well. In addition to the traditional research work he has been engaged in as an ethnographer since 1958, Dzhon began pursuing creative literary modes of expression in 1969 while a student of literature at the Przhevalsky State Pedagogical Institute in the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic. Dzhon's creative writing is rooted heavily in his experiences as an ethnic Dungan in Central Asia during the Soviet and post-Soviet periods. His literary works are also interesting examples of literary anthropology or anthropological poetics, whose development gained momentum in the 1980s, with anthropology becoming more open to literary theory and literary forms, and ethnographic poetry thus gaining increased acceptance as a mode of representation. And as you can see on the slide here, Dzhon was also known by Chinese readers under his Chinese name, Zhang Erli, as many of his works have been translated into Chinese from the Russian. So Dzhon only uses Russian in a professional capacity, but he has good research knowledge of the Dungan language. Okay, I'd just like to show you a few photos that are pulled from the book Mystical Forest. So the first is a photo of the Dzhon family in 1973. And you could see Dzhon is actually seated in the front row on the far right. Next to him is his mother, who is in fact an ethnic Russian. Next to her, on her right, is the patriarch of the family. And then next to the father on his right is the eldest daughter, and the rest are all of the siblings in the background. Next, I'd like to show you a picture of Dzhon with his younger brother, Vianney Amin, in 1974. And this was taken back home in Central Asia during the brothers' service in the Soviet army, right? And for those of you who read Russian, you can see the SA on the lapel, on the shoulder lapel there, Sovietskaya Armia. Finally, there's a very interesting photo of Dzhon in 1981 with Dungan friends and national poets of Kyrgyzstan. Dzhon is in the back row, third from the left. And this picture was taken near the House of Culture, or Dom Kultury, in Alexandrovka, Chuy Oblast, in the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic, for an event commemorating Dungan poet Yasser Shavaza's 75th birthday. And Yasser Shavaza, who's probably the best known Dungan poet, is seated in the front row in the middle. And to his right is Ali Tolkambayev, known under the pseudonym Balka. And to Yasser Shavaza's left is Musa Jaganziev. And again, if you get a chance to see the book, you'll see many more photos and also more extensive descriptions of these. Okay, now I'd like to begin to talk about the selections in the book Mystical Forest. This is the cover image of the English language edition, which you see on the screen. And it is adapted from the 2011 Russian language edition by the same name, Tiny Les in Russian. The image was created for that edition, that Russian language edition, by Ali Dzhon's younger son, Ismar Dzhon, who is in fact regarded as a leading graphic designer in Kyrgyzstan today. Okay, so a few words about the introductory chapter to the book Mystical Forest. It discusses Dzhon and his place in the Dungan literary world, and it contains four parts. The first is a brief biography of Dzhon, which includes some of the photographs from Dzhon's personal archives that I've shown you. Second are some of Dzhon's own remarks on the title poem, Mystical Forest, which includes many of his creative sentiments in general, both about his poetry as well as his short fiction. And there, in addition to the 9 chapters of poetry in this English language edition, there is also one chapter of his short fiction that I also translated and annotated. Third, there is also a personal message to readers from Dzhon that he wrote upon my request and that I've translated. And finally, there is also a selected bibliography that I compiled. And this bibliography is a list of book-length works, scholarly articles, and scholarly book contributions attributed to Dzhon based on his own reporting of his published works as of early 2022. So in addition to his 2 published volumes of Russian language poetry, which this particular English language edition is based on, Dzhon has published more than 50 scholarly monographs and articles in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, China, and Japan. So he's an extremely prolific researcher in addition to being a creative writer as well. Okay. All right, so now I'd like to just show you the titles of the selections in the 10 chapters, the 9 chapters of verse and the 1 chapter of short fiction, and maybe just highlight a few of the selections to whet your appetite for this edition. So the chapter 1 is poems of rumination, as I call it. So among these is a moving poem titled February 7th, 2020, which is, as some of you may be aware, the date when inter-ethnic conflict broke out within Kordai Rayon or district, Kordai district, in Kazakhstan during the Dungan Kazakh ethnic clashes that occurred over the course of several days in early February 2020. Chapter 2 contains poems of autobiographical nature. So this chapter includes poems with a somber or serious tone, such as I Am to Blame, Fears, and Testimony on an Ethnic Topic, as well as those with a more playful or satirical tone, such as I Will Drink Life to the Lees, After Carousal, and Metamorphosis, subtitled A Donkey's Dream. Chapter 3 consists of poems about family. Among these poems are those dedicated to his wife, who I already mentioned is a Koryo Saram, which is the name for an ethnic Korean in the post-Soviet states. The poems also make reference to his two sons, Yevgeny and Ismar, to his mother, Valentina Sergeyevna, who is an ethnic Russian, as I mentioned earlier, and to his granddaughter, Avrora, who is the daughter of his younger son, Ismar. And Ismar and his family currently reside in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, together with Ali Dzhon. Yeah. Chapter 4 consists of poems about love. So these poems include, again, those with a more serious tone, as well as those with a somewhat lighter tone, such as the one titled A Joke of Old Eros. Chapter 5 consists of poems of friendship. So several of these poems are dedicated to Dzhon's Dungan friends and colleagues, including Muhammed Husezovich Imazov, Mar Vundizovich Zhumaza, and Ishar Shisir. The poem A Tree is a dedication to Yasser Shavaza, who lived from 1906 to 1988, the most celebrated poet of the Dungans, who was in the group photo that I showed earlier. Shavaza was also a writer, as I mentioned, of fictional prose. He was also a linguist, translator, and social activist during the Soviet period. If you are interested in more information about Shavaza, there was actually an English language edition of his works, the main title of that book being called Yasser Shavaza, that was also published by Peter Lang in 1991. And the author was Svetlana Rimsky-Korsakov-Dyer. Chapter 6 consists of poems of nostalgia. And these poems reference some of the many places Dzhon has spent time in, including areas of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, as you can see from the titles. Chapter 7 contains poems of melancholy. These poems include an early poem of Dzhon's, written in 1970, titled Emulating Sergei Yesenin. And as some of you may know, Sergei Yesenin, who lived from 1895 to 1925, was a famous Russian lyric poet of the Silver Age of Russian poetry who died at a very, very young age, tragically. Chapter 8 consists of poems of nationalistic character. So among these poems is one titled Unrest, which is one of the longest poems in the collection here in English translation. It is a heart-wrenching piece about the first Dungan migration from Northwest China to Russian Central Asia following the suppression of the Dungan revolt in the late 19th century, which I discussed earlier. To Dzhon Kasim is a poem dedicated to Dzhon's late uncle and all the veterans of the Great Patriotic War, or World War II, as it's better known in the West. Dzhon Kasim, the older brother of Ali Aliyevich Dzhon's father, right, was quite well known among the Dungans, for he was a jeweler who crafted traditional pieces. In the 1930s, he became artistic director of a professional music ensemble that performed folk tunes at the Philharmonic of the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic. He went missing in action, tragically, in the battles near Stalingrad during the Great Patriotic War. Just one other note about one of the poems here by Yan Hu. So this poem is about, as some of you may know, the best known among the anti-Qing Hui commanders to flee to Russian territory. So Bai Yan Hu, also known as Mohammed Ayub in Arabic, was a rebel from Shanxi who fled with several thousand of his followers during their defeat in the Dungan revolt, settling in the village of Karakunuz, present-day Masanchi, Kazakhstan, near the border with Kyrgyzstan. The group numbered slightly over 3,300 upon arrival in the spring of 1878. And this is according to figures from Svetlana Rimsky-Korsakov-Dyer. Chapter 9 consists of poems of religious character. Here I'd like to mention just briefly the poem Dua. So this particular poem pertains to the act of supplication regarded by Muslims as a profound act of worship. And just a mention of a second poem of Friday Prayer. This is about the special congregational prayer Muslims hold every Friday in the early afternoon in place of the ordinary Zuhr prayer. Okay. And then I'd just like to just make a few comments about Dzhon's short fiction, which is also really quite interesting and unique. So translations of 4 of his short stories appear in chapter 10 of my English language edition, Mystical Forest. The first 3 of the 4 short stories appearing in this English language volumes were previously published in Dungan translation in the Dungan newspaper Shi Yue Di Qi, which means October banner in English. The 4th story, translated as Bitter Root from the Russian Gorky Kordian, has neither been published in the original Russian nor been published in translation until now. So just very briefly, the first short story, The Bicycle, is about a Dungan youth's attempt to retrieve his treasured bicycle, which leads to important revelations of identity and self. In the second short story, Tales of Grandmother Mayan, the grandmother tells her young grandson about the strange goings-on in a vacated neighborhood house that the villagers believe to be cursed, and a mysterious incident soon ensues on the manor. In the third short story, Last Song, there is a search for the meaning behind a sad melody played by an old man on his camus, which, as some of you may know, is a three-stringed fretless lute used in Central Asian music. And finally, the fourth short story, Bitter Root, is structured as a dialogue or playlet. And this story follows the life paths and mutually unanswered yearnings of an unnamed man and woman, beginning from their school-age friendship through their time as parents to growing children. Okay. So finally, to wrap up the presentation, I'd like to show you first the Russian original text and then my English translation of a poem called Masanchi, which appears on page 100 in chapter 6, the Poems of Nostalgia, in my English language edition, Mystical Forest, if you get a chance to see that. So what you see on the screen is the Russian original. And in terms of structure, this is a representative poem of Dzhon's that consists of 4-line stanzas with an alternating rhyme scheme, meaning A, B, A, B, right? Although I have rendered this and Dzhon's other poems in free verse in the collection, Mystical Forest. Okay, so now I'd like to read to you my own English translation of this poem in free verse, right? So again, it's titled Masanchi, and Masanchi is, again, a village in Kordai Rayon, or a district, Kordai district, which is located in Jambu Oblast, or Oblast meaning region or province, in Kazakhstan. It's located near the border with Kyrgyzstan, and the village is considered the original capital of, if you will, of the Central Asian Dungans. Prior to 1965, it was called Karakunuz, which means black beetle in Turkic, while the traditional Dungan name for the village is Yingpan. Okay, so so I will read the poem now. So it's titled again, Masanchi. So I have come again to you, Karakunuz, to my hazel grove and your streets. I wanted to shake off the weight of my existence and revisit my childhood. But nothing here is the same. And my heart hurts so much I could scream. The river water is not so clear. The village is not Karakunuz, but Masanchi. People my age with white beards call me to the mosque, not to play on the river, and invite me into their homes where their granddaughters serve us tea. And only the children in school, as always, play, run, shout. To them, the years are, well, really nothing. Let the old people grumble about time. It's all right, though your appearance has changed and a new generation has grown up. You're still home for someone. They rush towards you, if only for a moment. So in closing, I would like to mention some of the salient features in Dzhon's writing. His lyric turns of phrase, the vividness of his descriptions, his keen wit, the humbleness of his character, his genuine candor, the intensity of his emotions, his devotion to his family, his friends, and his faith. And last, but certainly not least, his overwhelming concern for the past, present, and future of his native people, the Dungans of Central Asia. I hope that readers of Mystical Forest, my English language edition of Dzhon's works, will go away with a better understanding of Dzhon as a multifaceted individual who is at once the most important ethnographer of the Dungan people and a masterful poet and writer. For further information about my work on the Dungans, as well as my other work, including information about mystical forest, as well as my earlier book, which came out with Peter Lang in 2021, Dungan Folktales and Legends, please visit my personal academic website on Georgetown Domains, and the URL is kjy.georgetown.domains. And you also can find the discount flyer there on the events page that I mentioned earlier. Okay. Thank you all so very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions if you're able to stay for our Q&A.
Thank you very much, Professor Kevin Yin, for that enlightening talk. Again, I'm Mark Bender here with our class of Chinese 7470, Chinese Ethnic Literature. I want to thank the class for helping us get through a few technical difficulties earlier on today. But now we will have a question and answer few minutes. I'm wondering if anyone in the class or online has any questions for Professor Yin. You can mention your name.
PhD student. I was working on the cross-border trade between the northern Xinjiang and eastern Kazakhstan in the first half of the 19th century. And there were some mentions of the Dungan merchants participating in the cross-border trade. And I was just wondering if you happen to know where I could find more sources on that. I was trying to look into travel writings in Russian and also the documents in Chinese, but I couldn't find, or maybe there was just like a use of very ambiguous term Muslims, and I wasn't sure if they were Dungans or let's say other Turkic peoples. And I was wondering if you have any recommendation about like places to look for such sources. Thank you.
Yes.
Did you catch that question?
I think I caught most of the question. I think the person is looking for more sources about the Dungans, like historical types of sources. Is that correct? Maybe in English or? Yeah. Let me see. In terms of the Chinese language scholarship has been picking up in recent years since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Prior to that, the Soviet Union was closed, of course, and there was limited access to the Dungans in what was Soviet Central Asia for much of the time. So there are some scholars who are Chinese scholars now who are doing research on the Dungans in Central Asia and that are very interested in them. Many of them are working out of Gansu province, for example, or Shanxi province. I think Northeast Normal University is one of the places that comes to mind. There are some scholars there who are interested in the Dungans and also held a conference there that had a lot of Chinese-speaking researchers, also Russian-speaking researchers attend a few years back. In terms of the English language scholarship on the Dungans, there's more than there is with the English. The major researcher, or one of the major researchers, is Svetlana Rimsky-Korsakov-Dyer. She actually visited the Dungans during the Soviet period. I believe it was beginning in the 80s, perhaps late 70s, early 80s. She visited, I believe, 3 times, possibly 4. And she wrote monographs stemming from each of those visits to the Dungan kolkhozes. So if you search her name, Dyer, D-Y-E-R, you will find these works of hers. Some of them are articles that appear in Monumenta Serica or other academic journals. I also have a link or links to her on the Dungan Studies page of my website, which I mentioned on Georgetown Domains. And she was trained as a linguist, in fact. She received a master's degree in the 1960s from Georgetown University. Which is where she learned about the Dungans from her master's advisor at the time at Georgetown, Father Surace, and that became sort of a lifelong passion for her. And she has, I mentioned again the book about Yasser Shavaza, which came out in 1991 with Peter Lang that she published. That is quite an extensive volume of the original Dungan, for example, selections of the poems of Shavaza's, her sort of very literal sort of English translations with annotations, but also Chinese translations as well. And also her own comments on those selections, as well as extensive bibliography of his works. So I think that would also be very interesting for you. And some of the more recent researchers that I could mention would be, for example, Ivo Spira, who was with he was in Norway with University of Oslo, and then he was with, I believe, in Sweden, I believe at University of Lund, but now he's somewhere else now. I forget he's now maybe, oh, actually right now he's with Lund. I'm sorry, now he's apparently with University of Lund, but he's somewhere else now in Scandinavia, no longer in Norway, and he's been taking a short sort of break from his work with the Dungans, but he did do some field work with Dungans a little bit over 10 years ago. He was interested in the folklore and folk songs, and he also developed a very interesting website for people doing research on Dungan language, literature, culture, that is still up. And there's a link to that site on the Dungan Studies page of my website. His name is Ivo Spira, spelled I-V-O, last name is spelled S-P-I-R-A. And then finally, I should also mention Soledad Jimenez Tovar. Her last name is spelled Himenez-Tovar. She's with at a university in Mexico, and her PhD dissertation was on the Dungans in anthropology, which she did with the Max Planck Institute a few years back. And she's still actively involved with research on the Dungans. And I've been in contact with both Ivo Spira and also Soledad Jimenez Tovar, and they would be very happy to speak with you if you were interested in contacting them. And again, there's also a link to her information on my Dungan Studies website, and you could reach out to them and tell them that I recommended that you speak with them if you're interested in doing that. I'm sure they'd be happy to do that, or anybody else who's interested in speaking with them. Yeah.
How
So
about,
yeah.
how about if any of our students are interested in speaking with you, Professor Ian? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. That's an open invitation to anybody, yeah, who was here today or maybe weren't here today and maybe will watch the recording later or just haven't even seen me, who would love to talk to me. Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I developed the website and try to maintain that when I can, is to get people interested in what I'm doing research on, the Dungan people, and also to contact me. So all my contact information is there on my website, also my email, everything. Yeah, at any time, please feel free to contact me.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions? Maybe you might want to come over here so you can hear it.
Hi, Professor Yin. My name is Wujing Shi, and yeah, it's my computer. Yeah, so my question is actually about like the fantasy animals and the mystical nature things. The poet depict like in the several of the poems in the chapter 1. I only read the chapter 1, so like I'm not sure whether like it repairs again in other chapters. So I noticed that there are some like pretty exotic images like the lions, unicorns, the poet used in the poem Mythic Forest. And actually, like for that poem, he tried to develop and depict a very tranquil and abnormal nature things far away from the secular world. However, I'm curious about if whether like for Dungan people, like for like animals like or legendary animals like lions or unicorns, for them is the native images or the foreign images, because like the unicorns is not like images from the West after Renaissance. It's also like a very familiar totem from the Hindu culture. So I mean, if it's foreign, if it's a foreign images, like why he trying to use these images outside Dungan culture, but not use like animals or maybe plants from like Dungan people familiar with. So
Yeah, that's a great question, Uchin. Well, I mean, I guess the unicorn also has meaning in Chinese culture as well, right? So that but it's interesting. Nonetheless, it's still a mythical creature, correct? So I think it is so interesting that and in his own message that I actually translated, which I mentioned in the actually introduction before the actual poetry selections begin, he talks about how this mystical forest, which is the title of the title poem, and also for the collection, really talks about sort of this the elusiveness sort of this spirit that he's trying to that we sort of as humans sort of are sort of approaching or walking around or into it. If you consider this to be sort of like a forest, right? That our journey in life, that at every turn there are all of these like animals, lions and tigers and then the rapids, but there's also these mystical sort of creatures there as well, which of course are also depicted on the cover image. right? Very aptly. So yeah, I think he's trying to capture that sort of idea of this sort of elusiveness, sort of this of this of this sort of characteristic sort of the human spirit, or just the human spirit in general. Like how do we define it, right? And it's sort of, I think Dzhon is sort of putting forth that it really is this forest in a way, right? As we're going forward, we really don't really know what's going to be, around around the next turn, or after the next clearing, around after the next sort of group of trees, right? And it could be, yeah, it could be an animal we've seen before, but it could be something entirely sort of different. Yeah. But I think it is so interesting that these creatures like that you mentioned do have all of these meanings in these other cultures, and that also brings bearing to the possible interpretation of what this forest represents, or the human spirit, if you will.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And then
you're very welcome. Thank you for your question. I think it's absolutely wonderful, the question. Thank you.
and the question is like for the third or fourth poem's title, Memento Mori, of the first chapter. It's actually like it's a Latin word like Aramaic generally means like you must realize like one day you will die. So this is like the original meaning of it, but actually when we think about like the Western or like a broader context or global context, is always related to the Western philosophy and the Christian theological theories. I mean, like when a Dumba poet choose like this word, which actually has strong implication to the Western culture as the title, why he used like the Latin form instead of like use like maybe 小而精 or other language to express the same meaning?
Yeah, that's a great question too, which I really appreciate that question. Yeah, so it was definitely purposeful. I think that he chose that. I don't know. Perhaps it's a term that like a writer in Russian would use. And then Dzhon, therefore being a Russophone writer, a Russian-speaking writer, seems like that he also chose to use that particular term here, right? And I should mention that actually Dzhon does not, in fact, actually know any Western languages, such as English or Italian or anything like that. So with some of his use of English or other languages in Latin alphabet, I actually had to make some just minor sort of corrections actually to them. But I know it absolutely was purposeful that he did do that. And perhaps it does shine a light on his sort of his status as a Russophone writer, right? Somebody who's using Russian language as the primary medium for their creative work, but who is not ethnically Russian, however. Right, because as you mentioned, yes, very well, he could have written it used a Dungan term or a Chinese term, but he chose to use the Western term. But yeah, very, very interesting though. Very interesting comment.
Thank you.
Urban too. Thank you so much, Wujing. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. That's
Hi.
that question that we just discussed really resonates with a lot of the discussions that we've had in class here, particularly about the use of languages by minority people within a majority culture. Also, it relates to things like the use of local color or culturally that are have ethnic content, and then also culturally neutral sort of images that are also used in the poems, and how the writer positions himself between these stances of being a Russian, but being an ethnic minority and also having these other relations back in Northwest China. It's all quite fascinating. Did someone else have a question? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Yin. That was just riveting, very fascinating on so many levels. So I appreciate that. My name is Nathan Young. I'm a lecturer here at Ohio State. I did my dissertation on nostalgia in Turkey. So I'm really fascinated when you brought up, I think it was chapter 6 of the book, I think it was Poems of Nostalgia. So I think a couple questions for me. One is maybe at some point we could sidebar this, but I would just love to know the term for nostalgia in the local language and how you translated it into nostalgia and any sort of range of connotations for that, because there's nostalgia is such a rich term. It's also been so theorized, at least in Western academia. So I'd love to do a deeper dive on the notion of nostalgia as Dzhon uses it and you translate it. But the question is linking nostalgia to change in time and place. Do you see this as a common social cultural phenomena of the Dungan people because there has been so much movement, displacement, threats to culture, leaving villages? Is this a common way of sensing, creating culture and identity among the people?
Yeah. Well, just first to clarify, so for the titles for the chapters themselves, I actually did not translate them per se, because in Dzhon's original Russian language volumes, it was called well, the first was roughly Mystical Forest, which came out 2011, and the second one came out 10 years later, 2021, which was called My Autumn. Maya Orsian. And I because I had already started on the project prior to 2021, and I just put it all into my English language edition as Mystical Forest. What I did, in fact, is there was no particular organizational principle in either of those editions, but they also weren't published. They were published by friends and colleagues of Dzhon's in honor of his as we call jubilei in Russian, or jubilee, the anniversary, like a major birthday for him. So he didn't really have say in it, and it was just sort of a compilation, a loose compilation of his writing. So I was the one that decided to put them into the 9 different chapters in terms of that. But there is a word in Russian, nostalgia. There is that sort of word. I'm not sure if it shows up in these poems per se, but there is a word for that comes directly from there. But in terms of your question, absolutely, there in Dungan literature in general, if you get a chance to read any of it, you will see this this link between this sort of nostalgia sort of for the past. It's a very common sort of a theme in the writing, and a lot of it at this point is actually for the historical homeland of China. Correct. And again, that you will see that has been more prevalent since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, when, with the opening up of the borders, not only have researchers been able to go into the post-Soviet Central Asia and do fieldwork on the Dungans, but it's also been the other way around, that the Dungans themselves in Central Asia have been learning more about their ancestors, if you will, the Hui people in China, with whom they did not have any real contact until the 1990s. So it's sort of both ways as well. But you definitely see this yearning, absolutely, in Dzhon's writing, but also in the writing of others, and for a lot of it for China as a historical homeland. Correct. And also to places they may have traveled, for example, in Russia, though, as well, or other places in Central Asia. for example, you might also see that Uzbekistan or right. If they, for example, Dzhon now lives in Kyrgyzstan, he very often writes about his yearning for his childhood home in Kazakhstan. So, or, so there's the yearnings for the different sort of republics, if you will, also in the former Soviet Union. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's
You're
really,
very welcome.
really interesting and fascinating both. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to contact me, email me, whatever. We could talk a lot more about all of it.
Yeah, I will for sure. I will do that. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
anybody else as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ian. It looks like we're at time right now, so let's give Professor Ian another big round of applause.
Thank you all so very, very much.
And again, I hope that anyone here who wishes to contact Professor Ian will make those connections and we can continue some of these conversations offline. So thanks again, Professor Ian. We'll see you next time.